Hi all. Today we'll be taking a look at the creation operators in Rxjs. So Rxjs operator is basically a function which can be of two types. Either it is a pipeable operator or a creation operator. So today we will be focusing mainly on the creation operator, which is basically a standalone function which can be used for creating a new observable. So I have created a sample Angular 14 application which basically lists all the creation operators that are available in Rxjs. So now let's go to our application and see the code. So we have an app component.html where we have the side nav bar which we see here, and in the app component I have created the list of operators that are available, and once a particular operator is selected, in the app component.html I have a component called app creation. So the currently selected operator, I will be passing it as an input to the app creation component. So if we go to the creation component, within the ng on changes, there is only a single input, that's operator. Whenever that operator changes within ng on changes, we will be getting a corresponding function from the creation constants.ts, and here I have added a function for each of these operators. So let's get started. The first operator is ajax. So as the name suggests, this operator, that is the ajax operator, can be made use to make an HTTP or XML HTTP request. The output will be returned as an observable. So this can be invoked in multiple ways. The simplest way possible is we can just pass the URL of our API. So in this case, I am making use of a public API, and we can just pass it to the ajax operator, and we will get this as the result. So here in the creation component, what I have done is, once I call the function, so whatever function I am using here, so here it is the demo ajax. So once it is called, I will be getting an observable as a return. So this observable, I am binding it to the HTML using the async pipe, and also in the TS file I am subscribing so that I can get the stream of values which are emitted in the console. So I am logging it in the console as well. So in case of ajax, you can see that the data from the observable which you receive is the ajax response, which will have all the fields like the status, the response headers, the actual response of our API, all those things. So here we had just passed the URL. A more verbose way is you can pass an object which contains the key URL, the type of the HTTP method, so it can be get, post, or anything, and you can even pass the request headers or anything, and the effect is exactly the same. You will get back the ajax response. So in case you need to get back only the data for our ajax request, you can make use of the getJSON function, but it will work only with the normal string format. So here I have reverted back to the string format, and here you can see that the actual data from our response, it is getting emitted from the observable. So that is regarding the ajax operator. So the next operator which we have is the bindCallback. It can be used to convert the output from any normal function to an observable format. So in this example, what I have done is I have created a sample function called sample callback, and within that I am passing these three parameters and executing this callback. So now this particular callback function, I will be passing it as a parameter to the bindCallback operator. And this bindCallback operator, what it returns is a function which returns an observable. So you need to execute that function. So once you execute that function, we will be receiving the observable along with the data which we expect. So now, since in the creation component we are logging the emitted value and also we are displaying in the HTML, let's see the output. So once I click on the bind callback, you can see that the parameters which we passed, that is null, 5 and hello, all these are getting emitted as a single value. So it is a array which will have all these three values. So the third operator, that is the bindNodeCallback, it is quite similar to the bind callback. The only difference is that it expects the callback to be a node format. So what happens is the first parameter, it will be equating it as an error. The remaining things will be considered as the actual callbacks parameters. So the syntax is exactly similar. This is the only difference. So while executing, you will see that previously in the bind callback, we got three values as output, but in the bind node callback, you will see that only the second and the third parameters will be displayed. The first one will be considered as an error, so it will not be emitted. So that's the basic difference between bind callback and the bind node callback. The next operator which we will be taking a look into is the differ operator. So a differ operator can be used basically to execute a factory. So what happens is, like, in case we need to lazily create an observable, and this observable will be created only when the subscription to that particular observable happens. So in that kind of scenarios, we can make use of the differ operator. So in this example, what I have done is I have created a factory which basically checks for a random number. It generates a random number and it checks the value. In case it is greater than 5, it will create an observable which listens for the document.click event. And in case it is less than or equal to 0.5, it will create a sample interval that is basically similar to the set interval. For every 1 second, it will emit an incremental value. So now let's try this in action. So I am going to click the differ option, and here you can see that now the random number which is generated, it is less than 0.5, and because of that the interval is getting created, that is the observable is created from the interval operator, and for each second a new value gets emitted, both here in the async, that is in the HTML, as well as in the console. So like this occurs randomly, and when we try to create a second time, you can see that now it's actually showing the click event, like it is creating the from event based on the document.click in the HTML, but in the console it will be creating the interval. So this happens because we are subscribing twice within our application, that is once in the HTML using the async pipe, and in the TS by explicitly providing the subscribe. So that's why it creates two behaviors. This is the reason why I mentioned that the behavior of the differ will be decided at the time of subscription. The next operator which we will be taking a look at is the from operator. So if you check the from operator, it basically accepts an array or array like input, and it creates a observable stream. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to click the from. Now you can see that here only the last value which was emitted will be displayed. But if you check the console, you can see that that particular array, that is 100, 200 and 3000, they were emitted as three separate values within our console. Now similarly, it can also convert a promise as well to an observable. So here I am going to use a promise resolve. Now if you see, that entire promise is resolved and the value is emitted as a single value. Now let's take a look at the fromEvent operator. So if you look at the syntax of fromEvent, it accepts two parameters. One is the target. So basically a target should be something like a document or an HTML element which will have the add event listener and the remove event listener properties, something like that. So here you can see that it should have the has event target add remove, and in case we have that, it will be qualified as a target. And the second parameter is the type of event which we need to listen to. So in this case, I am listening for the document click event. So let's click on the from event. You can see that whenever I click anywhere on the document, a value is emitted within our observable. It will give the details on where the click happened. Client X, client Y, all this information will be present within that emitted value. So the next operator is also quite similar to the from event, but it has a more verbose syntax. So let's take a look at the from event pattern. So in the from event pattern, what happens is that basically we can pass the implementation of the callback. So here by default the add event listener and the remove event listener is automatically added by the from event itself. So in the case of from event pattern, this needn't be this particular implementation. So it can be anything, like any action which can be cancelled, like it can be passed as a parameter to our from event pattern. So this will be the adding event handler, and the second will be the removing event handler. So in this particular example, I have used the same use case as from the previous from event. Here I am passing the implementation, that is document.addEventListener click along with the handler which will be passed from the from event to within this callback. Similarly, I am making use of the document.removeEventListener with the click and the handler. So now let's take a look. So here you can see that again this works exactly similar to what we saw from the from event. So this option provides a little bit more control to the developer. So in case the developer wants to implement something else, he can provide that particular implementation here within the callback. Next, let us take a look at the generate operator. So the generate operator can be used for generating a sequence. So this is the format for creating the sequence. So the generate will accept an options parameter which will contain the initial state. So this is basically similar to something like a for loop, like where we give the initial value of the loop or the sequence which is generated by the loop. So here we give the initial state as 0. The second parameter is the condition. So this particular sequence will be generated as long as the value is less than 5. And the third one is the iterate, where we will be saying that the sequence will be incremented by 1. And finally, we are just displaying the value as it comes in the result selector. So let's try this. So here only the last value is getting displayed, but in the console you can see that it's basically generating a sequence from 0 to 4. So depending on the condition. So in case I change it to 10, now you can see that the value is generated from 0 to 9. So that's the use of the condition. Now in case I modify the iterate to increment by 2, you can see that the value is generated with an incremental of 2. And the last one is the result selector. So in case I need to multiply the result by 10, you can see that the value which is emitted is actually multiplied by 10 based on the result selector which we provided. Similarly, we have the initial state. So in case we give it as 4, you can see that the first value emitted is 4, and that's the only value as the condition is met in the next increment. The next operator is the interval operator. So this is quite similar to our set interval. Basically, a particular event happens every time after a particular interval which we have provided within this interval. So in the case of the interval operator, what happens is like after a particular time period, a new incremental value will be emitted by the observable. So in this scenario, every 1 second, a new value. So initially it will be 0, then it will be 1, 2, like that it will be going. So let's see that in action. So initially the value is null, and after 1 second only the initial value will be emitted. That is 0 will be emitted only after 1 second. So after that, every second a new value will be emitted from the observable. So now let's take a look at the timer option. So the timer is another operator which is available in Rxjs. So this is similar to the set timeout. So here, after a particular interval of time which we have provided in the timer as the parameter, a single value will be emitted. So here I have given that time as 1000, and after that a initial value will be emitted from the observable. So I am clicking here. You can see that after 1 second the value 0 is emitted and the observable stream is closed. There is another syntax for the timer where you can provide a starting value and you can provide the time interval. So this executes similar to the interval operator which we saw earlier, but the only difference is that the initial value will be emitted immediately, not similar to the interval. In the interval, the initial value will be emitted only after 1 second or whatever time interval we have given. So let's see this in action. When we click on the timer, immediately the value is 0. So after that, it will perform similar to the interval operator. The next operator is the off operator, which is quite similar to the from operator. The only difference is that whatever value we provide within the off operator, it will be emitted as a sequence. So in case of the from, even if we give an array, it will be split up and send it as individual values from the from operator. But in the case of off operator, you can provide multiple values. So whatever values you have provided as the parameter, those will be emitted. So in this scenario, you can see that I have given 3 values and these have been emitted as 3 separate entries from the observable. But in the case of an array, so I have converted this into an array, you can see that it is emitted as a single value, which is not the case of from. In case of from, all these will be emitted as separate values from the observable. Next, let us take a look at the range operator. So the range operator accepts 2 parameters. The first one will be the starting number and the next will be the number of entries which needs to be emitted. That is, here in this scenario I have given it as 10. So starting from 3, 10 values will be emitted incrementally from our observable. So let's go to the range. When we click on it, you can see that starting from 3, 10 values have been emitted. That is, from 3 to 12 have been emitted. So in case you change it as change the count, you can see that accordingly the values will be emitted from the observable. Next, we have the throwError operator. So the throwError operator can be used for throwing an error from the observable stream. So it will be emitted as a error callback within the observable. So here in this example, I have created a new error and I am returning it from the throwError operator. So in the creation component, when we subscribe to this particular observable, here I have added an error handler. So in the case of throwError, this particular error handler will be executed instead of the next value. So let's see this. When we click on throwError, you can see that the error handler was executed and it is being shown here. And this particular unhandled exception that is happening from within the template, since we made use of the async operator, the actual error is getting thrown here and the value within our HTML template is null. So this is the way in which the two subscriptions react to a throwError. That is, this is from the explicit .subscribe within our TS file, and this is from the async pipe from within our HTML. And finally, we have the if operator. So the if operator is basically similar to the differ operator, but it is executed eagerly, and the basic syntax is like it will check for a Boolean value, and based on the Boolean value, either we have a true observable or a false observable. So in this scenario, what I am giving is based on the value of this success flag, which is a Boolean, it will either emit a value success or failure. So initially the success is set as true. Now if we go to our application, you can see that the value emitted is success. Now let's change it to false. And now if you go, you will see that the value which is emitted is failure from our observable. So this is the use of the if operator in Rxjs. So hope you are able to get a overall idea about the different creation operators which are available in Rxjs. So we will be continuing the different types of other operators like the pipeable operators in a future video. See you soon. Thank you.